If you made it this far, you're part of the story now. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss tomorrow's special tale. It's one you won't want to miss. Every day, a new story. Every story, a lesson worth hearing. We'll see you in the next chapter. He bit a royal guard's sleeve. What happened next left the crowd speechless. The morning sun rose gently over London, casting a golden hue across the majestic gates of Buckingham Palace. Tourists from all corners of the world gathered in front of the royal landmark, cameras in hand, voices filled with wonder. Among them stood a man who didn't blend in. Chad, a 35-year-old American tourist from Texas. Loud, confident, and clearly looking to make an impression, he wore a bright red t-shirt that screamed King of London in bold white letters. With khaki shorts, sunglasses perched on his forehead, and a phone already recording, Chad looked less like a curious visitor and more like a walking disruption. As he approached the area just in front of the royal guard, he raised his voice so everyone around could hear. Are these guys even real? Or are they just statues with fancy hats? He jeered, pointing directly at the nearest guardsman. Laughter echoed from a few onlookers, but most people turned to stare, unsure whether to be amused or horrified. A retired British woman, elegantly dressed in a navy blazer and hat, whispered sharply, "How disgraceful!" But Chad paid no mind. He thrived on attention. He began filming himself, turning the camera from his own grinning face to the silent, unmoving guard standing just a few feet away. "Look at this guy," Chad said with mock disbelief. "He's not even blinking. What happens if I get a little closer?" He stepped up to the white line painted clearly on the ground, a boundary that every respectful tourist knew not to cross. But Chad wasn't just any tourist. With a dramatic flourish, he lifted one foot and stepped boldly over the line. The crowd gasped. Some took a step back. Others raised their phones, realizing this was no ordinary visit. The energy shifted. There was tension now. Excitement. Disbelief. A child clutched his mother's hand. An older man muttered, "He's about to find out why that line is there." Still, the guard didn't flinch. Like a statue carved from stone, he remained perfectly still. But something had changed. His fingers, clenched just slightly tighter around the hilt of his ceremonial saber, hinted at a silent warning. Chad smirked, oblivious to what was building around him. And then he took another step forward. Chad's second step over the white line pushed the tension to a whole new level. The crowd, which had already been on edge, now fell completely silent. You could hear the rustle of camera straps, the soft click of phone record buttons, even a few nervous gasps. Chad was now just inches away from the royal guard, who still hadn't moved a muscle. The stillness was eerie, unnatural even. But Chad didn't notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. "Come on, man, do something," he laughed, waving his arms dramatically in front of the guard's face. "Is this guy even breathing?" His voice echoed across the square, bouncing off the stone walls like an insult that refused to fade. Some tourists looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with growing outrage. One father pulled his daughter back, shielding her from what felt like an unfolding disaster. The sun was now high, the heat creeping past 80 degrees, and yet the chill in the air was unmistakable. Chad leaned in even closer. His phone, now inches from the guard's face, kept rolling. "This is unreal," he whispered, grinning wide for the camera. "I'm basically touching him." Then, in a move no one could have predicted or condoned, he suddenly lowered his head and bit the guard's sleeve. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, loud and sharp like air being sucked out of the entire plaza. A woman screamed. A child cried. One man shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" While another fumbled with his phone, dropping it in pure shock. Chad pulled back, laughing like it was all a joke. "Relax, people. It's just fabric," he said, his grin smug and unbothered. But the guard was no longer just a statue in red. His fists were clenched now, his jaw tight. Though he still hadn't moved, every muscle in his body radiated tension, like a coiled spring ready to snap. His discipline held, but barely. The crowd sensed it. The energy shifted again, from disbelief to anticipation. Something was coming. Chad, still oblivious, leaned in one last time and said, "Guess these guys really don't care." And that, everyone watching knew, was the final straw. The moment Chad uttered those final taunting words, "Guess these guys really don't care," everything changed. It was as if the entire square held its breath. The royal guard, who had remained frozen through every insult, every mockery, every physical invasion of his space, suddenly came to life. In a swift, precise motion, the guard took a single step forward. The sound of his boot striking the ground echoed like a thunderclap across the square. His right hand snapped to the hilt of his ceremonial saber, not drawing it, but holding it with purpose. His voice followed, loud, firm, and clear. "Step back immediately. You have violated royal protocol." The force in his words was undeniable. Tourists flinched. A few even dropped their phones in shock. Chad, once the loudest man in the crowd, stood frozen. His smirk disappeared as fear swept across his face. For the first time, he realized this wasn't a joke, and he wasn't in control. I didn't mean anything by it," he stammered, backing away slowly. "It was just a joke, man. Chill." His hands were raised slightly, palms out like a child caught red-handed. But the damage had been done. The guard said nothing more. His eyes were locked straight ahead, his face stoic once again, as if the moment had never happened. Except now, the energy around him had changed. He wasn't just a figure of ceremony. He was a wall of discipline, a man holding centuries of tradition on his shoulders. Suddenly, movement from the side. A security officer, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a dark navy uniform, strode toward the scene with unwavering authority. The crowd parted as he approached, the click of his polished shoes marking every step. Without hesitation, he placed a firm hand on Chad's shoulder. "Come with me, sir." Chad didn't argue. He didn't protest. His bravado had completely vanished. He nodded silently, his head lowered like a schoolboy being led to the principal's office. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he was escorted away. And then, as if on cue, the silence broke into applause. Dozens of people clapped, some even cheered. Not out of joy, but out of deep respect. For the guard, for the discipline, for the restraint. The moment had shifted from chaos to clarity. The guard stepped back into position. Still, unshaken, unforgettable. As the final echoes of applause faded across the palace square, a new energy settled over the crowd. One that blended relief, admiration, and awe. Chad, once the center of attention, was now just a fading figure being led away by security, his head low, his arrogance dissolved. The phones that had once filmed his antics were now focused on something else entirely. The unwavering figure of the royal guard, who had returned to his post without a word, without a change in expression. He stood tall, shoulders square, eyes fixed straight ahead, and yet, somehow, he seemed even more powerful than before. What had just happened wasn't just a clash between a disrespectful tourist and a man in uniform. It was a moment that revealed something deeper, about dignity, about tradition, about holding the line even when pushed beyond reason. People in the crowd, once passive observers, were now active participants. They whispered to one another. They nodded silently. Some wiped tears from their eyes. The incident had stirred something inside them. Within an hour, videos of the event were already circulating online. Clips of Chad's behavior and the guard's restraint spread like wildfire on social media. On TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, users from all over the world watched in disbelief. Comments poured in by the thousands. Some were angry, condemning Chad's actions. Others were inspired, calling the guardsman a true symbol of honor. "He could have lost it, but he didn't," one user wrote. "That's real strength." "This is what professionalism looks like," another commented. "He made all of us proud," someone added. The story was everywhere, shared by news outlets, reaction channels, and even veterans groups. For many, it wasn't just about Buckingham Palace anymore. It was about respect, something that in today's world often feels like it's slipping away. By the end of the day, the square was quieter than usual. The white line, which once seemed like a small detail, now felt like a sacred boundary. Tourists stood behind it, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Parents told their children the story, pointing to the guard as they explained why respect matters. And somewhere, beyond the glare of cameras and the roar of online voices, the guardsman remained motionless, his silence speaking louder than words. The following morning, Buckingham Palace didn't feel the same. The usual noise of excited tourists had softened, replaced by something more reverent, more thoughtful. News of the incident had traveled fast. The video had been viewed millions of times overnight. People from around the world had commented, shared, and debated it. But one thing was clear. The guard's self-control, his composure under pressure, had struck a nerve. Now, the square was filled again. Yeah, but the energy had shifted. Visitors stood quietly behind the white line, not because they were told to, but because they understood why it mattered. It wasn't just paint on the pavement anymore. It was a symbol, a barrier that stood between tradition and disrespect. People watched the guards with new eyes, no longer seeing them as mere photo ops, but as living symbols of discipline, heritage, and quiet strength. Among the crowd was Mike, a 40-year-old father from Chicago, holding the hand of his 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. They had seen the video the night before while sitting in their hotel room. Sophie had asked, "Why didn't the soldier get mad?" Mike didn't have an answer then. But standing here now, watching the same guards in real life, it all became clear. He stepped forward, stopping just before the line. Sophie looked up at the tall guardsman, wide-eyed. Mike glanced at the soldier, then softly said, "Thank you for your service. You reminded all of us what real respect looks like." The guard didn't move, just like the day before. But in that brief moment, something subtle happened. A slight nod, barely noticeable but unmistakably intentional. A quiet acknowledgement. That tiny gesture rippled through the crowd. People around them seemed to feel it too. And then, without warning, someone began to clap. It spread slowly at first, then built into a round of applause that filled the square. Not wild or chaotic, but steady and meaningful. The applause wasn't just for the guard. It was for what he represented. For boundaries, for honor, for the idea that some things are still worth standing still for. As the sunlight broke through the clouds, it glinted off the guard's buttons and the brim of his bearskin hat. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. He just stood there, unmoving, unshaken, unforgettable. A silent reminder that even in a noisy world, dignity still speaks the loudest. We'd love to hear what you think about everything that unfolded in today's story. Do you believe the guard handled the situation the right way? What would you have done if you witnessed something like that in person? Have you ever seen a moment where someone showed restraint, discipline, or calm in the face of disrespect? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't hold back. Your perspective matters, and we're building a community that values discussion, reflection, and respect. Whether you're watching from the US, the UK, or anywhere around the world, let us know where you're tuning in from and how this story made you feel. Do you think traditions like the Royal Guard still have a place in the modern world? Or do you think public attitudes are shifting too far from respect and heritage? We want to know. This isn't just a video, it's a conversation, and your voice helps shape it. So take a moment, scroll down, and share your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow's story. It might just spark another conversation worth having.